Hello, I'm Seth. This is Acquired Salary, the best living through career mastery. In today's short talk, I'm going to talk about what nobody seems to be talking about right now. And it's going to have a massive impact on the future of the world. And that is the fact that men are leaving the workforce. To have the conversation, I'm going to react to CNBC's piece on it, where they present the problem, yet the video ends and there's not really any satisfactory solutions. But before we get into it, if you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. I would greatly appreciate if you would drop a like on this video and subscribe to this channel, because it is your support like this that helps to grow Acquired Salary's reach, allowing us to continue to give you free tools, information, and perspectives to build the life you want. With that, let's watch CNBC's piece on why men are leaving the workforce.
Men have been steadily dropping out of the workforce, especially men aged 25 to 54, who are often considered to be in their prime working years. As of August 2024, 13.7% of prime-age men were not working, compared to just 7.2% in 1954.
The long-term decline in labor force participation by so-called prime-age men is a tremendous worry for our society, for our economy, and probably also for our political system.
There's a surplus of prime-age workers who could be working and aren't, and that's this puzzling problem.
The unemployment rate for prime-age working men sat at 3.4% in August 2024. This number primarily includes those who are unemployed and looking for a job. But about 10.5% of men in their prime working years, or roughly 6.8 million men nationwide, are neither working nor looking for employment, compared to just 2.5% in 1954.
What's surprising is it's not a COVID phenomenon, it's not a recession phenomenon.
And for every prime-age man who is unemployed and looking for a job, there are more than 3, in some years 4, who are neither working nor looking for work.
So what's driving men out of the workforce? And if left unchecked, what impact will it have on the U.S. economy?
So it's clear just with the data that they presented here that men are dropping out of the workforce. This is also correlated with men's college attendance, which has been on a steady decline. And this is definitely going to be a contributing factor, in my opinion. But it is a complex problem that is going to be best solved by proper incentives. There's no question about that. So let's keep watching and see if they provide any solutions before I talk about how I think we can solve these problems.
Nearly half of prime-age men out of the workforce cited obsolete skills, lack of education and training, poor work record, or security issues as a reason preventing them from work.
The self-reported data of education and training are two huge contributing factors. However, these are partially self-imposed, and then the other part, I think there are some other parties involved that could be contributing to this issue. Further, the poor work record and security issues cited as a reason, that is going to primarily be self-imposed. So this still doesn't answer what the systemic reasons are as to why, but more data might help us understand a little bit further.
Education is a very important predictor of a prime-age man's odds of being out of the labor force.
The big impacts are on the non-college educated groups on their ability to enter and stay in the labor market.
Men who are not college educated leave the workforce at higher rates than men who are. At the same time, fewer younger men have been enrolling in college over the past decade.
If you look at the geography of where the most prime-age men out of the labor force are in particular, they tend to be in places that have experienced manufacturing declines. They used to graduate with a high school education and have good, stable jobs. They weren't glamorous jobs. They were, automobile factories, sometimes mines, other manufacturing jobs, but they were respected, they were stable, and they could support a family.
So here, the decline in wages is going to be important, and they're going to bring up some data here in just a second.
Then, due to technology-driven growth, a little bit due to Chinese competition, you've had a lot of manufacturing firms and the places where they were located that were one-horse towns become ghost lands, right?
Wages could also be a contributing factor. Median annual wages for men with a high school diploma have fallen from just over $57,600 in 1973 to $45,000 in 2023, adjusted for inflation. At the same time, wages for those with a bachelor's degree or more have increased by about $6,300 during the same period. This decline in earnings led to a 44% growth in the exit rate of men without a college degree from the workforce between 1980 and 2019.
I think, honestly.
So we can see here that College education is obviously important for men's participation in the labor force. The question is, why aren't men continuing to go to college? That data there of the decline in high school graduates' earning capacity and the increase in a bachelor's degree or more would indicate increasing value of a college degree. And this is furthered by the fact that the lifetime earnings of a high school graduate is going to be about $1.7 million over the course of their lifetime. But simply having a bachelor's degree brings this up to over $2.3 million. So it's like over $600,000 of additional income through the course of your life. And that's not considering any investing or anything along those lines. But this is putting the question now onto why aren't men going to college? And there's a lot that goes into college, and I don't want to dive too deep into that topic, but there are certainly some issues with the current college system as it is.
Status plays more of a role than wages. As I said before, you had a manufacturing job, it was respected, you were part of a community, breadwinner for your family, you had organizations like unions or Rotary clubs that surrounded your job, and that's gone.
In general,
to your point there, I don't necessarily agree on the fact that wages are unimportant. Wages are certainly important. From that standpoint, wages are a important part of being perceived as higher in the socioeconomic status. So the higher wage you earn, the more socioeconomic status you can command. And I do think she is on to something with the respect granted to people in certain positions. Because again, those are both contributing factors to perceived socioeconomic status.
men without children are also less likely to participate in the workforce compared to men with children, especially men without education or training after high school.
What we have seen is a huge rise in the proportion of prime-age men who've never been married, and a very, very significant decline in the proportion who are currently married and have kids at home. And those two trends track closely with the big changes that we've seen about male attachment in the labor force. Correlation isn't always causation, but looking at that correspondence is real important, I think.
I would certainly agree with him from that standpoint. Often what you see is, well, currently the incentives are misaligned, or there is not enough incentive for young men to get married, so they aren't getting married. And as they don't get married, then they don't have to accept responsibility, and they're more prone to dropping out of the workforce, because once you're a man and you're responsible for a family and children, it shows, the data shows that men are more likely to work harder and work longer hours. And again, it's simple incentives. This is kind of where the red pill, black pill, men going their own way movements make sure to highlight the incentives are stacked against men, especially when it comes to getting married. So it isn't surprising that we're seeing a drop in marriage rates as well as a drop in men's labor force participation rate. So part of the proper solution is probably going to be taking a look at what can be done on, making sure the younger generation of men actually pair up and get married and have families.
Meanwhile, 57% of the roughly 10% of men not looking for work said their physical or mental health was the main reason for not being employed, with 55% citing a disability, serious illness, and/or receiving disability benefits.
The whole question about the health and the mental health of male workforce dropouts is an extremely important and I think concerning one. Distressing proportion of the men who are out of the workforce say they're using pain medications every day.
A 2017 research paper estimates that an increase in opioid prescription between 1999 to 2015 led to about 43% of the decline in men's labor force participation rate during that period.
So this speaks to the fact that the opioid epidemic has certainly impacted men in a negative way, causing them to drop out of the labor force. Though I think there's not much that can be done at this point because we have made some systemic policy changes on those types of prescriptions and how often they're prescribed.
You have to ask, what sort of pain are we talking about? Are we talking about physical pain? Are we talking about metaphysical pain? There's an enormous amount of depression, mental health challenges that men in this grouping face. Some of this is a chicken and egg question. Did you drop out because you were feeling sad, or are you sad because you dropped out and you're living on the couch?
Unemployment is
that standpoint, I think it could go either way. Sometimes some men might get sad and this causes them to drop out of the labor force, but some men might drop out of the labor force and then become sad and demotivated in terms of re-entering the workforce.
is really terrible for people's well-being. Often people adapt to all kinds of negative shocks, losing a kid, being widowed, whatever, and eventually kind of come back. But long-term unemployment is one of the worst things in terms of that. So what you have is a kind of scarring effect, and it's worse for men because their identity is much more wrapped up in their role as a worker.
Men's decline.
Further from that standpoint, if we look at it in terms of kind of recessionary indicators, one of the things that is often an indication of the economy entering recession is the increase in long-term unemployment, which, of course, on the actual unemployment rate, men or just people in general that are no longer considered in the labor force or have exceeded the 6 months of being unemployed are taken out of the count. So they're no longer counted towards the unemployment rate. Just they're marked as like, you're not participating in the labor force anymore. But again, this is something that's super important and we need to address it and figure out a good solution.
Declining workforce participation could potentially leave a lasting impact on the American economy.
It means slower growth of the economy, obviously. It means bigger wealth gaps within our society.
It certainly will have an impact on our productivity and probably already is.
The U.S. has been experiencing a severe shortage in labor, still missing 1.7 million Americans from the workforce compared to February 2020. The McKinsey Global Institute estimates that U.S. GDP could have been $296 to $442 billion higher in 2023 if the country had been able to fill its job vacancies.
So this here is an important point because obviously it goes into recruiting processes and incentives. Many large companies do not currently provide substantial continuing education, sufficient training, and therefore it's a catch-22. So if you've exited the labor force and you want to re-enter, it becomes very difficult because there's this perceived skills gap and companies don't want to train employees to close that skills gap. Therefore, the men that have exited the workforce and want to re-enter have to go and educate themselves or get training before they can re-enter. And it would very much lower the barrier to entry if companies were willing to invest in men and people in general. And again, this would make it so that the companies are taking responsibility for fixing the skills gap that they so often complain about. It really boils down to if you can hire capable people, and once you hire capable people, then you can train them. And there's all kinds of data that supports the fact that if you provide training opportunities to your employees, they are more likely to stay with your company longer. So again, it would be beneficial to companies in the long run. But at this point in time, especially with the current economy, companies are just complaining about skills gaps. Hiring managers are looking for unicorns because they are being expected to do more with less, which again just perpetuates the problem rather than fixes it.
However, some experts suggest the impacts of men leaving or never entering the workforce could be more sector-specific.
You need young men coming in wanting to replace those people going out. And so if men had primarily been in more manual labor, more blue-skilled and skilled trades, if they're older and they're leaving into retirement and there's not as many young men coming in, both because of declining cohort sizes, but moving in a different direction type of careers, we're going to be losing that sector of productivity.
Despite a steep
This point here, it is obviously sector specific. The blue collar construction work is one of those areas where it's not necessarily going to be the case of what I'm going to talk about here. But right now, Scott Galloway, he did a talk about do we love our children? And essentially, over the course, he talks about how the older generations have not created or opened up the opportunities for the younger generation to step into and grow and to become more competent. And this is a issue in terms of the older generation is failing to pass along opportunities to the younger generations, which can be demotivating because if you feel like you're stuck in a dead end job, then you're probably more likely to drop out of the labor force, especially if you can figure out the numbers to make it work to where you can afford life outside of it. And another prime example of this, not relating to the blue collar section, is politicians. Many of our politicians in the United States are in their 60s and in their 70s, which limits the opportunity to lead the nation and prevents those opportunities from being passed down from the older generations to the younger generations. So there's an issue on the leadership side of, okay, yes, there are obviously people that are still retiring and creating those opportunities, but it's not at a significant enough rate to help encourage men specifically to stay in the workforce. Perhaps this leads into men being impatient because it takes time to develop a long-term career and get to a position of senior leadership, but it's something that is important to consider.
Deep rise in federal funding, the infrastructure sector hasn't been able to find enough workers, with the construction workforce shortage surpassing 500,000 in 2024.
We are a little concerned about the impact that inflation is going to have and has had on the movement of infrastructure dollars into the actual productive activity. Having a shortage of men in construction is going to raise a problem.
The trend could have a dire sociopolitical impact as well.
It'll get worse in ways that we would not like. I mean, I think it would lead to more premature deaths, but it will also likely lead to radicalization and polarization, because this is a frustrated, left behind group with no options.
Yeah, and we see this in terms of looking at the younger generations. Young men are, in general, the trend is showing that young men are going to be very conservative, as young women are not so conservative. They're more liberal. And that, again, is a part of the thing, a part of what's going to need to be addressed in terms of if you're looking to facilitate a long-term relationship, you need to have some shared core values. And currently, young women and young men are growing apart in that area where they're not sharing as many values because men are becoming more conservative and women are becoming more liberal. I don't necessarily know the perfect solution for that, but that is something that is also worth considering. In potentially there's a solution that can help encourage men to partner up with women and get married so that they can accept that responsibility and stay in the workforce.
There are problems that government can address and problems that government can't address.
So one of the first functions that beats out policy is economic growth. You have a strong economy, you're going to have increased wage structure, and it's going to bring people back into the market.
More than a quarter of prime-age men not looking for work cited insufficient pay as a reason preventing them from work. And nearly half said competitive pay, salary, compensation, and/or bonuses was a very important factor when considering whether to enter or return to the workforce.
Again, that's just, it boils down to simple incentives. I feel like most people are very happy to work hard, especially if they feel as though they're rewarded for their hard work. And regardless of what the Federal Reserve says and what Jerome Powell is saying about economic growth, is currently it seems like there's a lot of stagnation for opportunities available to the younger generations that this video is not necessarily discussing, but that is going to play a very key role in re-engaging men into the workforce, especially if it is high school graduated men that are dropping out. Well, if they're high school graduates, they're probably not going to be as prone to working in corporate roles, which are going to have those higher paying jobs. So we have to take into consideration some of the facts that, yes, GDP growth is great, but it has to be in the specific sectors that are going to create opportunities for the less educated men to re-enter the workforce.
The young, better training, skills training, better some form of post-high school education, encouraging that, maybe even subsidizing that. I think part of the youth mental health crisis has to do with what's next. What's AI going to do? What am I going to do? Are there any stable jobs? I can't afford college. All those questions all come together. And so models that help them kind of give them a jump start can be really effective ways of intervening. And there are actually now really promising programs in high schools which teach kids financial literacy. They teach them about equitable entrepreneurship. They teach them about how do you foster better mental health as part of the workplace. And it seems to inspire kids to go on to college, right? Because they sort of see a pathway where they didn't see it before.
29% of men and out of the labor force said that training and educational programs was another important factor in considering a return to the workforce.
Having the type of commitment from the employer to train and retain and offer upward mobility for workers, I think will be very important. Trying to figure out more about career pathways in the labor market and not just the education side. So how is it that someone moves from first job, next job to best job? How do we help people understand and navigate?
Nearly a quarter of working Americans said they weren't satisfied with their growth opportunities in the workplace, compared to other OECD countries that on average spend 0.1% of their GDP on training their workers. The US spent only 0.03% of their GDP on job training in 2022.
Older age groups, it's tough.
Again, this is important from the standpoint of closing that skills gap that employers are looking for. And it is important that we incentivize, obtaining additional education and skills so that you can be competent and have highly marketable skills that can make it easy for you to maintain employment in the workforce. However, from the standpoint of college, we already have all kinds of ways to lower the barrier of entry, specifically with the federal student loan program, which has its whole can of worms of issues, but I'm not going to address those in detail today. I might do it in a future video. So if you are interested in that, drop a like on the video and I'll continue to work on refining the script and the research associated with a potential solution there.
Tougher. You're probably not going to get these guys to retrain, but there are a lot of programs that have largely been pioneered in the UK, much more than here, but we're starting to pick up on them, that literally just try and reboot community activities. They get these isolated people in despair out of their houses. It can make a difference.
Social programs like disability benefits spark contentious debate.
It's very controversial. People have very strong opinions about this. While we don't know why it is happening, we can be pretty clear that the social welfare programs are helping and the disability programs are helping to finance this situation in a way that was never originally intended.
A 2018 analysis by the Joint Economic Committee found that 64% of prime-age men who aren't working were receiving some sort of government assistance.
So the one benefit that they rely heavily on is disability insurance. One, because they often are unable to work if they have a physical injury or high levels of addiction or whatever. But it also provides health insurance, which is huge.
Very much against the initial intentions of the founders of the program. They've ended up with a perverse situation that too often subsidizes or even incentivizes helplessness and long-term dependence. If we thought about a system in which we had a work-first principle where the incentives were for getting the training and then showing up at the job and then staying at the job, I think we'd be in a lot better place than we are today.
However,
I think he makes a very valid point. Of course, it is, as they said, controversial, but the point about entitlement programs and social welfare programs is spot on because it can create incentives for people not to participate in the workforce. Of course, single men that don't have a family and can keep their expenses rather low, all things considered, low enough to where re-entry into opportunities that are available to them often are perceived as lower value in comparison to what they get on their current disability or government assistance.
Some experts remain doubtful about whether altering the benefits program will lead to meaningful results.
I think until we deal with the deeper problem of ill health, ill mental health, these guys aren't going to respond to incentives.
Everybody.
I don't agree with that point. I think it's pretty clear incentives matter, and there's no way around it. And often the best way to improve your mental health is to have solid pillars of support in your life, consisting of family, friends, a career or work, and hobbies outside of work that you spend your time on. And of course, if you re-enter the workforce and you have an income that can facilitate discretionary spending, which allows you to do and grow hobbies outside work, then that's two pillars there. And of course, when you pick up hobbies, it's easier to make new friends, as well as you don't have to worry so much about spending time with family, especially if your family is in a different state, because you would likely be able to afford a plane ticket during the holidays to go visit your family. So there's certainly important aspects to consider, and it's all about incentives, and a part of fixing mental health is going to be aligning incentives to encourage men entering the workforce again.
Buddy has responsible for their, for their brothers. Everybody's responsible for their neighbors and their friends. And we ourselves as citizens can help to shine a spotlight on this. It shouldn't be America's invisible problem. And the more that we talk about it, the more that we pay attention to it, the closer we get to turning this around.
So altogether, I think the solutions to this problem of men exiting the workforce are simple in theory, but going to be far more difficult in execution. I think the number one fix is, fixing the perceived value of college or the return on investment of college to encourage college attendance, which is going to fix the education problem, which they quoted at the beginning of the video. It's also important that we incentivize companies to create substantial training programs, enabling them to hire prime age men, even if their skills are not perfect. This would help to close the skills gap and make it so that more men are employable in the eyes of companies. But again, that's on the company side, so there has to be incentive there, perhaps tax break if you provide training programs or something along those lines. Next is we need to look to address the incentives for men in terms of keeping and maintaining long-term relationships, specifically as it relates to marriage and having kids, because married men are far more likely to accept responsibility, become providers, and therefore increase work attendance and performance overall. Next is going to be incentivizing the older generations to train and grow opportunities for the younger generations to actually create additional value to participating in the labor force and holding down a job, because the more opportunities that are available in terms of growth, the more likely that somebody is to stick around in the workforce. And again, growth opportunities are going to further enable men to provide a better living for their family as well as fund hobbies outside of work. And then finally, after addressing all of these items, if there still seems to be no response by prime age men or just people in general, then I think it would be time to see what can be done about the incentives or perverse incentives associated with disability insurance and entitlement programs, see what we can do to adjust those programs to make it so that it is not encouraging people to remain outside of the workforce and actually participate in it. Overall, what do you think? Please share your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. And if you've made it this far into the video, you may as well like the episode and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future videos to help you master your career. And again, if you're interested in learning my perspective and understanding of how we could fix colleges, drop a like or a comment, and I will be sure to get a well-researched video out on that topic here soon. Until next time, thank you.